People say the Trinity is illogical and contradictory. Some do so by asking, since when does 1 + 1 + 1 equal 1? Perhaps you've seen the doctrine of the Trinity presented in this way as a means of declaring it an absurd concept. Maybe you've critiqued the Trinity this way yourself, as you wonder how 3 fully divine persons can add up to one God. As Christians, we do not think of God in mathematical terms. However, because many object to the Trinity by thinking of it in this way, it's important for us to respond to. Let's do that. What are we to make of this objection? Is this mathematical equation a legitimate way to portray the Trinity? The doctrine of the Trinity teaches that each of the 3 persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, are God, and that there is only one God. Being the rational creatures that God made us to be, it's not completely unexpected that as we grapple with the doctrine of the Trinity, we end up thinking about it in a mathematical way. But it tends to be critics who present the doctrine by means of this mathematical formula. And it's usually an attempt to declare the Trinity a completely illogical and absolutely absurd concept. How should we respond? Do we defend the doctrine by saying, well, we're dealing with a divine mystery here. The equation might not add up in our finite minds, but we gotta just marvel at the mystery. When it comes to God's triune nature, 1 + 1 + 1 does indeed equal 1, even if we can't understand how it could possibly be. No, we can't do that. A formula like this is not a divine mathematical mystery. This equation is plain and simply a mathematical impossibility. Some people will attempt to resolve the problem by turning the plus signs into multiplication signs. Does that work? While it does present us with an equation that adds up, this response misses a fundamental oversight made by those who present the Trinity as 1 + 1 + 1 equals 1. We'll see what that oversight is in a moment. How then should we respond to those who think of the Trinity in this mathematical way? We know that God created the orderliness of numerical systems, and discovering the laws of mathematics has been a mind-opening experience which shows the extent of God's order in creation. Let's look at the Trinity in connection with the fascinating world of algebra. On a historical note, perhaps you know that the word algebra is of Arabic origin. The Persian mathematician Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi is known as the father of algebra because in 825 he wrote a revolutionary book on resolving quadratic equations. And it's from the Arabic word al-jabr, as found in the title of his book, that we get the English word algebra. Let's look at a few sample algebra equations. Here's Pythagoras' theorem, or this quadratic equation, x + 2y + 3z = 4. And how about 1h + 1w + 1c = 1f? What do you notice about all these equations, both the common ones and the non-conventional one? They all contain letters which are variables or units of measurement. These variables make it possible for 2 sides of an equation that look nothing like each other to actually be equal to each other when the right values are plugged into the variables. But what do you notice about this way of representing the doctrine of the Trinity? There are no variables, no letters that specify what the numbers represent. That's a problem, because algebra is all about the use of symbols to represent numbers, and they are entirely absent in this formula. But as soon as you add variables to specify what the ones represent, you have a legitimate equation. Take this equation, which we just looked at, and strip it of its variables, and you'll see the problem appear. Add the variables in again, and the problem disappears. One husband plus one wife plus one child equals one family. If we do the same thing for the formula that's been used to represent the Trinity, that is, if we add variables, we see that the problem immediately disappears. One divine person plus one divine person plus one divine person equals one God, or one divine being. And if you're an algebra fan and you like reducing equations, then you can write it out as 3p equals 1g. Or if we consider that each of the three persons is God, meaning that each person is infinite, then we can write it out this way. Infinity plus infinity plus infinity equals infinity. So, does the Trinity add up? I'm not suggesting that we should think of God in a mathematical way, nor am I saying that if we do so in the correct way, we can somehow make God's triune nature comprehensible to our finite minds. Not at all. For the infinite, eternal God will always be above and beyond the comprehension of our finite minds. However, if people insist on using a mathematical formula to think through God's triune nature, then they must identify the terms in the equation. And when they do, they will see that though the triune God is beyond our ability to understand, the doctrine of the Trinity is certainly not illogical nor contradictory. Rather, we see that God is one and three at the same time, but not in the same way. One divine being who eternally exists in three divine persons. Once we identify our terms, we can certainly say the Trinity does indeed add up.